staircase, which is a see-through, and saw this spiral was embedded in that staircase, and I was like intrigued to see it, because at first I saw it like one of those Chinese dragon. um they do dance when they have a Chinese New Year,
Mm.
that kind of thing. So it's a hollow, and I was, for some reason, I was reminded of umbrella. In a sense, you have a stick and then you raise up. So it was like in the middle of the staircase. Um, so kids were playing with that, like hide and seek, or like the jumping house, like inflated some jumping house or something. So I was looking at, and that's interesting. And then I was walking up to my building staircase, and the last one I saw, that kids were following up. Oh, let's follow her, and then it was following up, and I don't know why that dream reminded me of when Henry was speaking kings and giants. So is that kind of like warning dream about that I need to deal with that too? That's what I was talking to Henry about.
Okay. Well, I mean, it could be. It's some of it. Some of these things are, you know, what do you sense um, that it was? I mean, some dreams are just dreams. I don't remember hardly any dreams because I don't think God really speaks to me that way. On a very rare occasion where He has spoken to me through a dream, I've known it was God, rather than, well, what was that dream about? Why did I try and figure it out? So sometimes it's like, I think, Henry said earlier, the best thing to do is ask. If it was God, ask Him, did you give me that dream, and do I need to learn something from it, or are you warning me about something? Obviously, there are plenty of biblical dreams that were warnings. And, some biblical dreams which were very directive. And so I think sometimes when you have a dream, it's working out whether it's like a parable, which is a point to it that God's trying to get over to you, or whether it's more of an analogy of each bit means something. Because if it's just a parable, you really don't want to try digging into what everything means, because you'll just get bogged down when God is just trying to show you something. Okay, is He basically in this thing saying, hey, there may be some dragons that are involved around where you've got spheres of government, and usually buildings in dreams usually refer to your own life. And, if you sense that there's something to deal with, then take it back to God and ask for the revelation. Which dragon, or go to court and see if there's any accusations in that sort of area. I mean, some of these things, are very symbolic, and in a sense, the dragon that you were seeing was a not a real dragon, but a
Right.
representation of a dragon. So that in itself may be an indication that there's something that isn't really real, but it's trying to convince you that it's real. Because sometimes we can get bogged down with trying to deal with things and there really isn't anything there. I remember in deliverance ministry going round and round in circles with some people, and it was just a time-wasting spirit, just was going round and round and round and round, and you were never really getting anywhere because it wasn't really real. It was just pretending to be something else all the time. And in the end, it was just like, ugh, I've had enough of that. So I think it's, again, looking at building your conversational relationship with God through things like this, where you can go back and ask Him,
Okay.
what were you trying to reveal? But if it wasn't a real sense of foreboding, or you woke up with a not a good feeling, then generally, I don't tend to sort of get too involved in dreams, anymore. But God speaks to people in dreams. I guess because I speak to him face to face most of the time, then I don't really need any more. I've got enough I can cope with already without having more things coming. So anyway.
Usually I don't remember it like you. So, but I just kind of remember it when, as Henry shared about, he was dealing with the kings and giants. So it kind of brought it up. I didn't have sense of like, oh, I gotta deal with it. It was just more curiosity of, oh, what is it about? Always question.
Yeah, I mean, when I first started to see things like this from a heavenly perspective, I saw mountains and I saw dragons. But first of all, I saw temples, and I was like, oh. And I mean, I didn't, this was sort of back in 2010, so I didn't really have any idea what I was looking at. But I saw some temples on top of mountains, and I thought, oh, wow, this is a place of worship. But it was not a place of good worship. I discovered that these temples were places where we'd given homage to the enemy, and therefore the enemy has usurped our authority because we were worshiping him. And I found that each of these temples had two pillars. One was fear, and the other one was something associated with the particular mountain. And I realized that we had been giving the enemy authority over us by worshiping his temple through fear and through pride or through other things that were revealed. And essentially we had to dismantle those temples by pulling down the pillars and making sure we were not going to operate in fear or in each thing that was revealed. That's the first time I really saw anything like that. And then, the implication was we have authority in that realm, but the enemy is trying to usurp that authority either by deceiving us or getting us to operate in a opposite spirit to what God wants us to operate in. Once I then began to see some of those things represented as giants or dragons, then I learned to go and find out why they were operating before I went to try and deal with them. Because normally I'm sort of, hey, let's go and kill it then. But God wouldn't let me, and I learned to find out why I was operating in less authority than I was, and why I was giving those things authority. And I found that in the encounters, they appeared bigger than me. That's because I didn't know my authority, and I didn't know what the legal rights were. As soon as I found the legal rights and I realized that I had authority and of a judicial verdict against that dragon, giant, whatever it might have been, then they were not bigger than me. And the reality is they can appear bigger when, like the children of Israel, I guess they saw that they were grasshoppers in their own sight. And that's what I recognized. There were some areas where I was not seeing myself in the right level of authority. Therefore, these dragons were like intimidating. But actually, really, they're representations of the enemy's authority. That's what they are. And when we know our authority, then they're in their rightful place below us. I would never take on a dragon below it, even if it was the same size of it. I want to be above. I want to be in the high ground. I want to be seated in a place of authority to deal with those things, not try and take them on with hand-to-hand combat. They're not like demons. They're things you don't want to mess with, but on the other hand, you don't want to be afraid of them either. Yeah. Okay. All right. Anyone's got anything they want to talk about or share about today?
Mike, would you talk more about these bodies that we have, like um not only the spirit soul bodies, but like how what Ian talks about there in, I think, was it First Corinthians 5, there like many different bodies that you, when you ascend, you want to connect. Is that clear?
Um,
I forgot the chapter.
yeah. I personally, I don't really relate to that myself. I think symbolically, we are seated in heavenly places and therefore we have positions. So I would rather call them positions of authority rather than bodies, which people could then think that they've got loads of different bodies that they've got to try and inhabit. It's a position of authority that I'm in that I see those things related to. So do I have various positions of authority and roles within the realms of heaven? Yes. So when I engage in heaven, I engage in the position of that authority when I'm going to do something, whether I'm seated on a throne or operating in a courtroom, whatever. So I don't sort of personally relate to it as physical bodies or different spiritual bodies. You know, I am me. And when I engage in that realm, I'm either engaging in my spirit or I'm engaging with my spirit and soul. My physical body is on earth. Should my physical body go into that realm, then I guess I'm going in there in a complete, trans relocation into the realm of heaven. But I don't think I've ever done that I'm aware of. I've been in trances that I've been unaware of my physical body, but I don't think my physical body's actually gone in there. But I certainly go in there. My spirit is in there. My soul continually goes in and out of that realm, connecting with the positions I'm in. So that's how I see it. A lot of things, a lot of people have revelation that they express in a particular way that other people express in other ways. And it's just learning to connect with what you connect with. And if connecting with bodies in the realm of heaven works for you, then go with that. For me, I see it as positions, really, of authority.
Okay, so let me rephrase that. I've been talking to others about because they were talking about the resurrected glorified body that Jesus had right now, and so I was reading scripture to like really identify how is his resurrected glorified body is different from before the cross. And I mean, he was already transfigured, walk on the water, walk through the cloud, and possibly like levitating and all. And
Sure.
so what particular things do you see different?
Well, in a sense, Jesus physically died. So, he was resurrected with a resurrection body, which is different from the transfiguration, which is a transformed body. So, that is so we can operate on earth, but we are his body on earth and he is seated in the heavens. So he is expressing himself on earth through us as the body of Christ, if you like. So we are a representation of his body on earth, but we are operating as sons of God, but in a way he was the Son of God and the Son of Man on earth, and he had a physical body which was not subject to anything negative because the enemy had nothing in him. And when he was transfigured, he was essentially releasing the spiritual light that was within him expressed through his body, shining and radiating that spiritual light. And whether we radiate that physically or radiate that spiritually, we are to be, in a sense, flowing with rivers of living water and creating an atmosphere of heaven on the earth around our lives. I don't believe I will get a resurrected body until I've either physically died, which I don't have any intention of doing, or I've been translated into that realm, like Enoch and Elijah. So Enoch and Elijah are sort of a transition, I guess, because they were translated into heaven, but they never physically died. So do they have a resurrected body like Jesus, or are they still waiting for a resurrected body like Jesus? I don't know. I'm interested to go and talk to them, I guess, and find out. But they were able to manifest, or Elijah was able to manifest back on the earth, having a physical body. I know Ian Clayton talks about Moses getting his body back because there was this sort of contention over his body, as described in Jude. But I want to make sure that my physical body here is not affected by anything of my genealogy from an earth perspective. The order of Melchizedek had no genealogy, and therefore I believe that we can be transformed or transfigured or metamorphosed here into a restored sonship of what Adam and Eve would have operated in had they not have messed it up. Now, whether that is fully in this age or whether that is in ages to come, I'm not really sure. But I want to make sure my physical body is not subject to death. Therefore, I want it restored and made whole, and therefore I don't want anything subject to death operating in my physical body, which is why I take communion, to apply the body and blood of Jesus so that my physical body won't be subject to the effects of death, which is the wages of sin. And the wages of sin has been dealt with by Jesus on the cross, so I don't have to deal with it. So I want to make sure I apply the victory of the cross to my body, soul, and spirit, that I can be one and whole. Whatever that looks like, I'm not really that bothered, to be honest. But because Jesus was able to do the things he did after the cross, before the cross. So he walked through a wall and appeared before them, but then he walked through people and disappeared in front of people before he went to the cross. So he was representing man living on earth, and then he now represents man living in heaven in a dual realm dynamic, which is what he wants to teach us, to be able to live in dual realms and function from heaven into the earth in that way. So, I think we can get tied up with semantics and trying to figure everything out and then miss out on what we should be doing every day. So in a sense, the most important thing is that we're living in heaven, manifest in heaven on earth, a gateway of heaven into the earth, rivers of living water flowing from our innermost being, creating an atmosphere of heaven around us and through us and in us. And some people may radiate glory in a physical way, and some people may radiate glory in a spiritual way, and some people may do both. I don't know. At the moment, I'm more concerned with learning how to mature in sonship than just the mechanics of it, I guess. But
I was just wondering because we have been in different ascension. He's been working in our body, like regeneration and refreshing and restoring. So I was exactly wondering what you were wondering about, whether we can actually bypass the death just like Enoch and Elijah, that
Yeah, well,
we would
yeah,
be able
I
to.
think so.
So yes,
I mean,
that's
I
what.
think there's a difference between bypassing death and going directly to heaven and living on the earth and not dying.
Right.
They're two different things in that, you know, Enoch and Elijah and others basically did not physically die and went straight to that realm. And they're now still functioning in that realm.
Right.
Whereas we can also live in this realm, not be
Right.
subject to death,
Right.
which means we
So
don't have to go into heaven bodily and stay there.
right.
I'd rather be here fulfilling what I'm called to do here and spiritually living there so that I can be in both realms, which is what Jesus did in describing to Nicodemus the fact that he was on earth, had come out of heaven, and he was here as a physical person, but he was also living in heaven. His home was in heaven. So he was describing how he was able to do what he saw the Father do him, because he was living in that relationship with the Father in that realm and in this realm. And I think that's the key, is to be living in dual realms, whereas Elijah and Enoch aren't living in dual realms. They're living in the realms of heaven. Whatever body they have, whatever's happened to their physical body, it is functioning in heaven. Now, I believe that they could function on earth, but they are not functioning in heaven. But we're actually on earth, so we need to function on earth and in heaven. And I think that's sort of something which at the moment, I think God is wanting to teach us as sons to be able to do that.
I was just thinking about, because in my thought that might have been sacred cow that I needed to kill, but resurrection was necessary to go through death. Otherwise, if you don't die, you don't resurrect it. But recently, I had like he was teaching me, we did die in Christ at the cross. So that's the death that we go through. Then we don't have to go through death to get resurrected body. So that's why I was.
Sure. Yeah. No. And I believe that. I believe that we were co-crucified with Christ. I believe that was the first death. You know, it is appointed man once to die. You know, that's it. We died with him, and everyone died with him, says in 1 Corinthians 15. And we're all made alive in him. So in a sense, we've already been resurrected to life. And we are bringing everything into an alignment with that resurrection. So now, Galatians 2:20, you know, I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live. Well, then it goes on to say, well, the life I now live in this body, I live by faith of the Son of Man who died for me, gave himself up for me. So there is a sense where I have died, but I'm also alive, you know, but I'm living differently. I'm living from a totally different perspective. I'm living from a different mindset. I'm living from the way he sees me and what he says about me, rather than what the earth says about me or what people say from this perspective. So I should not be subject to or tethered to an earthbound existence in any way. Although, you know, I don't want to go to heaven and stay there and not be able to come here and live here. I want to be able to do both. And I think that was what Jesus was really modeling for us, the ability to live in dual realms as sons of God. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anything else?
Morning, Mike, and everyone.
Morning, George.
A question, Mike. and over our journey of maturing, we seem to have emphasis, almost overboard emphasis, that revelation or experience, and half a dozen or a dozen different things that God just really pushes in on us, or we have a revelation of. Angels. Did you have an encounter? Did you have a period of time where they're really active, or they're really revelatory, or you begin to learn a certain interaction with them? I know some of the people we listen to, some of the men and women have more of an emphasis. Maybe it's like an anointing they have to interact and talk about them. I had that experience where I was really active, and now it's not so much. So there's other things. So maybe I was just going to ask you that question.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, yes, that I had engaged with angels, and angels took me to places, showed me places. And I say angels obviously as a generic thing for spiritual beings of various description. So I've interacted a lot with the different chancellors, the different created beings, the four living creatures, the seven spirits of God. For me, those are all descriptions of created beings. And I've had interaction with them at various points on my journey, and at some stages I had more interaction with them than I do now. I obviously still want to interact with my personal angels, the angels that are with me in this realm, in the spiritual atmosphere around me. And so, sometimes, again, that is more interactive, and sometimes it's more, oh, yeah, I need to send an angel to do something, and I'll do it, I've found that you go through seasons where, as God is teaching you something or giving you revelation of something, there is an emphasis on it, and then it sort of balances out. So I spend most of my time talking to the Father. And then when I go and do something, I do engage with other beings, whether it be men in white linen or other created beings at times, particularly if I go to the courts and I engage with some of the things that are going on there. But I would say, I have less of an emphasis on that than I have, because I guess in learning something, you focus on it. It's like, like when you learn to drive, everything's heightened. You think about the mirrors, you think about what you're doing, you look at and you're learning. So you're really focused, paying attention exactly in how to do this. If you've got an automatic car, obviously you learn how to drive one of them. If you've got a stick shift car, you learn to drive one of them, and there are different ways of doing it. Once you've actually passed and you can drive, you don't tend to think about the actual mechanics of things so much. You just instinctively drive. And I think I have involvement with a lot of the created beings more at an instinctive level, that they are part of my positions of government. They are part of my functioning in certain roles. The seven spirits of God are very much influencing me without me necessarily talking to them, because I'm very open for the influence and for the help and the support of that realm in my life, whether I'm always aware of it or not. And I think sometimes I'm not cognitively aware of everything that's going on. And so I engaged the seven spirits of God a lot at one stage, and I met them all and talked to them and had a sort of connection to them. And then it's almost like I can sense something that's happening. And sometimes that feels like a frequency, a color, and it's not like I'm seeing the color, much as sensing the Spirit of the Lord is at work, or in a sense helping me with a particular mandate, or the Spirit of might is operating there, which empowers me for something. But that's more of a sort of just part of my life. And I sort of am aware of it without being over aware of it, if you know what I mean. But, you know, sometimes, like Sunday morning, I was engaging, just enjoying myself. And I saw Jesus and I was talking to him and he said, oh, I've got this big flask of oil. And then all these angels, he called all these angels to come up and they all had a bowl and he filled the bowl with oil. And then I saw them come, say he sent them through a portal into the room. So I was like, oh, okay, what are you here to do? You know, why have you been assigned? And they were very much sort of assigned to deal with wounds or scar tissue and memories to do with various things that we were looking at that day. And, you know, I was sort of interacting. So I thought, oh, okay, well, I better share with others what you're up to so that others can interact with you. And then they knelt down on the floor, which I've never, ever seen them do before. They weren't kneeling before me, but they were kneeling so that people would come and kneel to engage them. And they had these bowls of oil that people could come and apply the oil to the scar tissue of various wounds in their lives. So that was an angelic interaction, which I participated in and then shared with others so others could participate with that as well. So, yeah.
You know, there was a couple of year period where it was really emphasis. And I got to, at some point, I was always concerned I wasn't focused on the Father, or as our background in the early days was Jesus, you know, it took us a while to realize the Father was there. Yeah. Then I've, like, you know, that was a focus time for me personally. But in that period of time, I did, like you say, I learned where the mirror was and how to put my brakes on, whatever. But now I am aware of that, but it's shifted again, back to the emphasis of the Father, of course. But now the angels are, another question, you talked about your personal angels. So I found in that journey that I had personal angels. And then there are the messenger types that we always heard about and knew about when, you know, God sends a message or something. Yeah. So that is progressing with me. And I appreciate you feeding that back to me.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I certainly, when I was learning to navigate the realms of heaven, then the angels were quite involved, and others were quite involved in that process of helping me discover things. And like particularly wisdom was there, you know, calling to me to come to her, to engage her heights, to learn, to interact with her. But that's a rare occurrence now, you know, because she's taught me whatever she needed to teach me. And I'm sure when I need to be taught something else and she's assigned, I will be interacting with her again and she'll teach me something different. At the moment, definitely my season of my journey is in spending time with the Father majority of the time. Very rarely even do I engage with Jesus, you know, as I used to. At the moment, it's like I want to mature as a son, so it makes sense that the Father would be spending time, in a sense, helping me to come into my sonship. So most of my personal interaction is with the Father, and conversing and engaging with him. But, you know, when I then engage with a court or something else, then sometimes, you engage with chancellors and others in that way. But there are seasons, I guess, in a lot of these things.
Along that line, and just talking along this line, Jesus came to introduce us and to represent, or at least to expose the Father. You see me, you see the Father. but we have traditionally been focused on Jesus because of we get stuck in our root.
Yeah.
Just reflecting kind of what you've been saying here, that the Father is certainly the emphasis that Jesus came to show us.
Yeah, definitely so. Yeah. And to be honest, it's like when I see and engage the Father, he looks like Jesus, but I know it's not Jesus, but he looks like him, because for me, he's not like an older version with a beard, a gray beard or something. He looks like Jesus, but he's not. I know the difference. I know his voice is different. I know his frequency, his fragrance is different. I know he's not Jesus, and I don't tend to spend time sort of looking at him in the same way that if I was to hang out with Jesus, I would, because it's a much more intimate type of experience with the Father. But if I do look at him in a visual way, that's what he looks like, because Jesus was the express image of the Father. He's like the Father in every way, although he's not the Father. So it's quite a weird thing. But that's how I engage, and I know others sort of have the illustration of the Father as being the Ancient of Days, and having this sort of like almost like hair like wool. Well, it's a symbolic thing of wisdom and position and respect and honor. It doesn't mean that he's got white hair, in that way. But people tend to connect with him, I guess, in ways that they can connect with him, and therefore I think that's how some people will perceive him that way. And it's not that he's bothered, I think he wants to engage with us. So whatever helps us engage, that's what he'll engage us with. Jesus has appeared to me in many different guises, many different ways. He's been robed, many different ways he's looked, and sometimes, it's felt very motherly at times, in a way. So I think, God is not a human person with a gender in the same way that we tend to think. But certainly for me, that's how I've experienced the Father. But I know, I've spent enough time hanging out with Father, Son, and Spirit to know their voice, to know and sense who they are, who I'm talking to, and who I'm engaging with, in that way. Because the Spirit appears differently to me at times. In a sense that sometimes there's a tangible sort of sense of person, but often there is just the life, the joy, the exuberance, the overflowing nature of abundant life that I sense and I experience when I'm in the Spirit's presence. And the Spirit is, in a sense, always within me, and I'm like becoming one spirit with him. If you're joined to the Lord, you become one spirit. Well, what's that like? It's like, well, I so am embraced with the life of God. It's like, that's my life. Like rivers of living water flowing through me. Well, what are those rivers of living water? The breath of God. I'm breathing in the breath of God. Well, all those are sort of ways of describing the Spirit, and it's life. For me, and some people would see that in a feminine way, and I've no issue with that at all. And I know ruach is a feminine word, but for me, it's very non-gender specific. It's just sort of just the fullness and overflowing sense of the joy of life that I get when I engage the Spirit, and it's very difficult to even separate that from me, because I'm like becoming more one with him or her or whatever. yeah, as a description. So
Thank you. Good.
I know sometimes I think we can get too caught up with trying to define everything tangibly so that it's fixed, because we get comfortable with everything when it's fixed, don't we? This is our comfort in the zone now. This is how it always is, and God is always going to disrupt that at times, just to show, hey, you can't put me into a fixed format. You know, sometimes I'm just going to blow that away. I'm going to be totally different, and it's going to be different because God doesn't want to be pigeonholed or put in a box or in any way restricted by us. You know, and I can restrict God by my own understanding of him, which is why I've been very careful not to lean on my own understanding anymore, because that's what I did. You know, when I had this experience with this tapestry of my encounters with God, you know, the Father sort of took me into the garden of my heart, and I had this, you know, a beautiful tapestry there. And, you know, I was just gazing at it, and I was so intently gazing at it that I lost sight of the fact that God, for the Father, was no longer with me. You know, and this was a very significant experience in my journey. And I was looking at this amazing picture, and it was made up of all these intricate parts of my experience and encounters with God, and they were beautiful. I mean, it was amazing, you know, and I was looking at it, just reminiscing over these amazing encounters that I had, you know. And then, you know, as I've shared this before, but I saw this little thread, and I thought, wow, I can follow this thread, go deeper into this. I pulled the thread, and essentially the whole thing just unraveled at my feet. You know, and there's the Father behind me with a big grin, laughing, basically. And he said, you know, you don't need an image of me. You've got me, you know. And it was like, Then he said, well, what's an image of me? And it suddenly struck me from, you know, Proverbs 3, do not lean to your own understanding. And it was like, it's an idol. So even my experiences, I can use my understanding to create this thing that I am comfortable with, but is actually limiting God to me. And I am putting a limitation because of my own understanding I'm leaning to. I've figured out who God is from my encounters, and I'm leaning to it. Well, I soon realized that had to stop. So I'm sort of never wanting to lean to my own understanding or try and figure it out, because as soon as I'm putting a limitation, because my mind it cannot possibly contain the full infinite God. So I just want the relationship, and I want to walk that relationship out rather than trying to get it all figured out and sort of overanalyzed, so that I'm comfortable with my own understanding of God. Whereas I could never be comfortable with God. It's beyond me being comfortable with him, because I'm going to limit him. As soon as I put my own understanding on him, it's bound to limit him, and I don't want a limitation. So. Okay, anything else?
We had one of our Northwest, well, actually is kind of bigger than that, father in the faith, an apostle, go home yesterday.
Okay.
And a man out of Portland who established a lot of sons over the last 40, 50 years. a lot of detail on the stepping through, the entrance in. I know we all probably have some of our own imaginations, or even maybe, I'm sure, experiences of that whole scenario, the stepping in, the going in. I had a friend talk to me a few years ago about brother who had gone home. He said, yeah, he's going to be introduced, and not introduced, but kind of a training program for a few weeks, and then he'll be sent out as a witness around the world. Not a lot of detail, I know, in the scriptures, but you have any thoughts about that period of those moments or period of time when we step through that veil into the other side physically? So I've been talking about it, living in both worlds, but when someone steps through.
Yeah. Well, I think once they have they no longer have a physical body, then they take up another role, which is part of their destiny ongoingly. And seemingly that means that they are able to continue to interact with this realm, and particularly with people that they may have a connection to or an assignment to, but not in a spooky way, but in a part of the witnesses or the cloud of witnesses that surround us and are involved in this realm from that realm. And they're now obviously the church that is enrolled in heaven rather than the church that's on earth. And one church, isn't it? Really, it's only one group of people, but we are functioning in different places and different responsibilities and roles. So have interacted with quite a number of those. In terms of the transition period, I know that there's a definite transition for those who have come out of the fire and gone into Zion and Mount Zion, that they do go through a training regime because they didn't know God in this realm in the same way. So perhaps there may well be training for everybody in that. I mean, it does say, when we see Jesus, we'll be like him. Now, what does that mean? Because obviously that's been taken to, well, when you die and you see Jesus, you'll be like him. Well, obviously we're not going to be limited by death in this. Those who do die, I guess they're going to have a transfigured experience or a metamorphosed experience in some way. I've obviously sort of mostly engaged with them once they're there and functioning rather than in transition. But I do know somebody who has seen people coming through that veil, and she has pointed them in different directions. It was like a tunnel that they came through into the realm of heaven, and she signposted them to different places. So that's an indication that there may well be different things for different people, depending on how much they've matured while they're here and how much more maturing they need to do there. Because I don't think it's an instant thing, just like it isn't an instant thing here. So if we have matured in sonship here, then when we're there, maybe there's less of that maturing to take place there. Now, of course, obviously time is different there, and things are, don't function in the same way. But, it wouldn't surprise me to think of some sort of maturing process. And I guess that maturing process is going to go on into the ages to come. Because again, there's going to be no end to the increase of his government and of peace and of wholeness. So maybe that's going to continue. I know that the children that are in that realm who have died here, whether miscarriages or abortions or other sort of things, they are in a different place. From it's difficult to describe it, but it felt like this was a dimension rather than a garden in heaven somewhere. And they were definitely being equipped and matured, because they never had a physical role on earth. They have to be equipped to even connect and understand their connection to creation and earth and their potential role. So I have engaged with them a few times and realized there's something different going on there in their maturity, and they were maturing not like in the same time scale as here, but they weren't adults, if you know what I mean. They weren't, oh, well, they've gone to heaven and now they're 33 years old. This is what, you know, I was always told. Everyone's going to be 33 because that's the perfect age that Jesus died at. And it was like, when I met my grandchildren, they were like 6 and 8, that sort of age. But then when I met them again, they appeared to have grown or matured. So maybe there's a process, because, you know, God doesn't want us to miss out on our childhood, does he? I mean, it's like, otherwise we'd be born adults. So then for them, they have a childhood. They were playing. I mean, it was just an amazing atmosphere of joy and fun, and angels were involved, and sort of a lot going on there. And their personal angels were involved with them there in their growing and maturing as children. But I guess at some stage they may well mature to become adult. I don't know. I've sort of not interacted that much with them, but there's definitely a maturing process that's going on there.
From knowing hardly anything about and even ignoring the cloud of witnesses to, you know, moving forward, how much interaction have you seen or do you see them having with us? For instance, angels bring messages. They guide at times, or maybe save us from danger. Do you see the cloud of witnesses at that level in our life? I'm beginning to pick that up, that I can hear a message or a direction from them.
I think so. I mean, I certainly have engaged with a number that were quite instructional in my journey, and Jacob was one. I interacted with Jacob a number of times, and that really unveiled a revelation. Not that he gave me the revelation, but he pointed me in the direction that I would receive the revelation should I pursue it. So he encouraged me to read his journey on earth, and to read particularly the story of heaven open and the gateway of heaven and the Bethel experience. And that actually, once I read it, the revelation came as I engaged it, although it didn't come from Jacob telling me the revelation, but pointing me in the right direction. So that was definitely a number of encounters that were very significant in my journey, and he was assigned to engage that with me. I personally haven't interacted hugely, again, because I spend most of my time interacting with the Father at the minute. So whether that will change in the future, maybe. But I know others, I know Joseph Sturgeon has written several books on sort of the role of the men in white linen or cloud of witnesses. And he has a lot of interaction with them. Now, we have had that. Joseph Sturgeon. Joseph Sturgeon he's called. He's written a couple of books, I think 2 or 3 books about that whole interaction with the cloud of witnesses. And he seems to have that thing, you know. Again, I guess we get different things that we're assigned to and different focuses that we're assigned to in terms of our own destiny and things. That isn't something that I particularly feel really drawn to. We have a council of 12 cloud of witnesses that are assigned to us as a ministry. Some of our mountain benches have cloud of witnesses that are connected to. that are insightful, and even their lives are helpful. When you read about them, I remember reading some of them in God's Generals and things like that, and just the insight into their lives and what they went through and how they did things are quite insightful. In particularly in terms of our own ministry here and what God's called us to, there were some clear lessons to be learned just from reading their life story and engaging with them. Now, I know people go and they drink the wine of their testimony and have an engagement with that. Some of my experience has been interactive, and some of it has been more ethereal, if you like. It's almost, I know my spirit is engaging with something, but I'm not really that cognitively connected with it. So eventually I usually catch up with things that my spirit have engaged with. So if my spirit has been engaging with a number of the men in white linen that I'm not cognitively aware of, it will have had an impact on me, which will eventually be producing something in my life, and the revelation of it will unveil as I continue my journey. But yeah, there's a lot of interaction that does go on. And some of it, there were some of the men in white linen that have roles. And I was talking to someone the other day, and they were describing that they write dreams for us. We were talking about dreams earlier, and they write dreams, scripted dreams, for those who need to engage in that way. So they're sort of dream writers. So that's their role for certain people. But that's, just one aspect, I guess, of some of the things they might do. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Okie dokie. Okay, anything else before we finish?
Do you have any insight on what exactly New Jerusalem, which is the bride of Lamb of God?
For me, it's an expression of who we are. We are the New Jerusalem. We are the expression of that. I really rather see us as the wife of God than the bride of Christ, in a sense, in that that's always, a bride is yet to get married. It's sort of, so I think we've been married, and we're now no longer a bride, but our wife. We have a level of authority and intimacy which has gone beyond betrothal into consummation. And I think we're being consummated in our intimacy with God and our relationship with God as it's a lot of mixtures of metaphors, because we're sons of God. We're described in lots of different ways. Some of it depends on whether you believe things are yet to be fulfilled prophetically or whether they've already been fulfilled prophetically. And for the bride of Christ analogy, to me, it's already been fulfilled. So the New Jerusalem, it's described as coming out of heaven into the earth. Well, I see that is what we're doing now. I don't see it as some future event as much as this is heaven manifesting on earth through us now, being gateways of heaven into the earth. So I see it more as an ongoing process of restoration rather than a future manifestation of something, which is an event. See, I look at things as process rather than event. So, I'm looking always for what is God doing ongoingly rather than, well, what's he going to do? So I don't see the restoration of all things as an event. To me, it's an ongoing process of restoring things rather than, well, Jesus will come back and then he'll restore everything and then we will fully be consummated and then it's always putting it off. whereas I don't want to see things put off. Yes, I do believe there are ages to come, but I think there's a lot that is going to happen in this age that we need to embrace and see outworked. And I think our representing God as his children in relationship with him, whatever the metaphors you use, are really talking about intimacy, and then an outworking of that intimacy to be a reflection or a representation that people can see God by seeing us and engaging us, where he is, Jesus with skin on to the world effectively, so that people will experience that and engage it. So, yeah, I think I wouldn't be building any theology around an apocalyptical book like Revelation, personally, because I just think it's fraught with all sorts of symbols, which as soon as you tie it down into a physical thing rather than a representation of something, then you're going to run into things, which potentially then you're trying to define something which is really a spiritual concept rather than a physical thing, in that way. But,
amen.
Yeah.
So as you see, if it is us, would it be, I'm this is another predestined and chosen thing, because when you see wedding, there's a wedding guest and the other different roles, and so would it be like our choice to become New Jerusalem, and some might not, just like you mentioned that even though we had body, we will maybe be only in heaven, or we will choose to be on earth, acting dual realm.
I see the ages to come as an expression of things restored to their original condition and God's original purpose for it, and then where it would go from there. So I think I wouldn't want to try and define something we get to choose whether we live in heaven or earth. Heaven and earth are going to be brought back into an alignment together. So it won't be like, there's a separation as it is now, because it's going to be brought back into an alignment where we're going to walk together with God again in the realms that he has created. And those realms are going to be interactively connected rather than separated. All separation for me must be restored. Right. And that means heaven and heaven's relationship with this realm restored to what it was when Adam and Eve walked with God in the garden. There was complete overlap. Heaven was not separated from earth in the way in which we now have it. And that's why God is bringing us back into that realm, so we can begin to bring that back into a manifestation as we begin to manifest heaven on the earth again, create gardens again, if you like, that will be expanding God's kingdom and God's glory to fill the earth, outworked through our sonship as we're revealed in our heavenly sonship roles on earth. So we may have different destinies which go beyond this age into other ages and into other dimensions and whatever there may be. And eventually I do believe we will become co-creators in that sense of being sons. So there may well be other things that are created that we have involvement with, potentially. But it's all, some of it is mysterious and a mystery for a reason. Right. So that we find those things hidden for us, those mysteries hidden for us in our relationship with God, which will unveil them, rather than they're all going to be just made open. So they are used in different terminology to sort of create that mystical type thing, so that we don't get it all tied down and try and figure it all out and work it all out ourselves. There's always going to be something about God which is beyond, beyond what we can imagine or think. And I think that's always going to be the case, which will make it always exciting. It's not going to get boring and, oh, well, we've found out everything now and where do we go from here? I think there's always going to be more because there's an increase.
Yes.
There is no end to the increase. So there must be something which is going to increase, and of peace. So there's going to be an expression of that increase, which is going to be an expression of our wholeness in relationship with God as we outwork it, I think.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Well, I'm going to leave it there.